Welcome back to Faith is the Podcast. You know, today we are going to be
Right.
diving deep into some practical steps
I like
to
it.
deepen your faith.
Deep dive.
And this is based on insights from Apostle Michael Orokpo.
Okay.
And of course, huge thank you to Business Referred for
Absolutely.
sponsoring this episode.
Love them.
If you are a local business owner looking to spread the word,
Mm-hmm.
hit them up at info@businessreferred.com
Yeah,
and tell them Faith is the Podcast sent you.
definitely.
So I am super excited about this deep dive.
Me too. Apostle Orokpo's teachings, I think, offer a really fresh perspective on spiritual growth.
Yeah, one of the things that really struck me is this idea of faith training.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about knowing the right things.
Yeah,
It's about actively training our spirits.
that's right. It's a great point. He uses this fascinating analogy of athletes training for a marathon.
Oh, wow.
They don't just wake up one day and run 26 miles.
Right.
It takes consistent effort pushing their limits,
Yeah.
building endurance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Orokpo suggests we approach our faith in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
We need to train ourselves to stay in God's presence.
Yeah, and what I find so compelling is how he links this to the way AI is trained.
Okay.
Think about an AI learning to play basketball.
Uh,
Every time it takes a shot, it's learning, refining its technique.
oh,
The successful shots reinforce the neural pathways,
interesting.
while the misses get blocked off.
So are you saying that in our spiritual lives, the more we engage in practices like prayer or worship, the stronger those connections become?
Precisely. It's about consistently reinforcing those pathways that lead us closer to God. And Orokpo provides some really practical techniques to make this happen.
Okay.
He talks about worship as a way to tap into a collective spiritual energy.
He actually shares this amazing anecdote about a woman who was feeling angry and frustrated.
Oh, really?
But the moment she started listening to worship music, everything shifted. She was overcome with emotion and found herself connecting with God in a profound way. It's like the music itself acted as a conduit to a higher state of being.
It's a powerful example of how quickly our inner state can change when we immerse ourselves in worship.
Yeah.
And then there's praying in tongues, which Orokpo emphasizes as a way to increase our spiritual capacity.
It's interesting because he compares it to physical exercise.
Right.
If you're out of shape, running even a short distance can feel impossible.
Sure.
But as you keep practicing, you build endurance.
Yeah.
And eventually those same distances become effortless.
Right. And praying in tongues works in a similar way. It's about expanding our ability to connect with the divine, building that spiritual stamina, so to speak.
Another technique he highlights is fasting.
And he describes fasting as a way to tame worldly desires. When we deprive our physical bodies, it helps to quiet the noise of our external cravings and allows us to focus more intently on our spiritual connection.
It's like fasting creates a space for us to hear God's voice more clearly.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's meditating on scripture.
I love how he brings up the example of Hindu monks chanting for hours.
Oh, yeah.
It really highlights the power of repetition in shaping our inner state.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Whether it's chanting prayer or focusing on a specific verse, that repeated engagement has a profound impact on our spiritual wiring.
So we're essentially training our minds and spirits to be more receptive to God's presence.
That's a great way to put it. And these aren't just theoretical concepts.
Right.
Orokpo shares his own personal experiences to illustrate how these techniques have transformed his life. He talks about developing heightened spiritual sensitivity through consistent training.
He's able to sense God's presence in everyday life
Yeah.
and has a much deeper understanding of Scripture.
It's like he's moved beyond simply knowing about faith to actually living it, experiencing its power in a tangible way. Yeah.
I love it.
That's awesome.
So inspiring.
Okay.
All right. Well, we'll be back in just a moment to continue this deep dive into the teachings of Apostle Michael Orokpo. Stay with us.
Yeah, it's truly inspiring to hear about someone like Apostle Orokpo who has dedicated himself to this spiritual training and experienced such tangible results.
It definitely challenges the assumption that faith is something you're either born with or not.
Right. It's more like a muscle that we can develop through consistent practice.
And that's so empowering because it means we have a say in shaping our own spiritual experiences.
Absolutely. We're not just passive recipients of some random spiritual lottery.
Orokpo also touches on something I think is crucial, this idea that training our faith isn't about achieving some kind of spiritual superiority.
It's not about becoming a spiritual superhero.
Exactly. It's about aligning ourselves with God's will and becoming more sensitive to His guidance in our lives.
Which leads to a really important question. How do we know if this faith training is actually working? What are the signs we're on the right track?
Well, Orokpo talks about the fruits of this training, and one of them is this increased spiritual sensitivity we've been discussing.
But let's unpack that a bit further because it's not always about having these dramatic mystical visions.
Right? It's often much more subtle.
It's about noticing the synchronicities in your life, the recurring themes in the things you read or the conversations you have.
It's almost like developing a spiritual radar, becoming more attuned to the whispers of God.
And the more we train, the more sensitive we become to those signals.
Another fruit Orokpo mentions is a deeper understanding of Scripture.
It's not just about reading the words, but letting them sink and allowing them to transform us from the inside out.
It could be a sudden clarity about a passage you've read countless times before, or finding yourself applying scriptural principles to your life in new and unexpected ways.
The words come alive and take on deeper meaning as our understanding grows.
And as our faith deepens, we also start to see confirmations of that faith in our lives. We experience answered prayers. We find the strength to overcome challenges.
These are the moments that solidify our belief and propel us forward on our spiritual journeys.
It's that shift from a theoretical understanding of faith to a lived experience where our faith is constantly being affirmed through personal encounters with God.
And I think that's what makes this whole concept of faith training so compelling. It's not just about passively believing, but actively engaging with our faith and witnessing it come to life in our own experience.
So to wrap things up, we want to leave you with this challenge. Don't just be a hearer of the word, but be a doer of the word.
Take these insights we've discussed today and put them into action.
Start small, be consistent, and watch as your faith grows stronger and more vibrant each day.
And remember, your spiritual journey is unique. What works for one person might not work for another.
Be open to experimenting and finding the practices that resonate most deeply with you.
And above all, be patient with yourself. Faith is a journey, not a destination.
There will be ups and downs, but the rewards of staying committed are immeasurable.
That's a great point to transition into the final part of this deep dive.
We'll be back in just a moment with some final thoughts on how to apply these principles to your own life and conclude this episode of Faith is the Podcast. Welcome back to Faith is the Podcast. As we wrap up our deep dive with Apostle Michael Orokpo, let's shift our focus to action.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the theory of faith. But as Orokpo emphasizes, action is key. He circles back to that basketball AI analogy. Remember, it's not enough to program the AI with the knowledge of how to shoot a basket. It has to actually take those shots to refine its technique.
So how do we translate that to our own spiritual growth? What does taking action look like when it comes to faith?
It starts with identifying those areas where we want to see growth. Maybe it's developing a stronger prayer life, or perhaps you're wrestling with fear or doubt in a particular area.
Once we've pinpointed those areas, what concrete steps can we take?
And those steps will be different for everyone. For some, it might be setting aside dedicated time for prayer or Bible study. For others, it might involve connecting with a faith community or serving others.
The key is to align our actions with those specific areas where we're seeking growth.
And remember, you don't have to make drastic changes all at once. Even small, consistent actions can create a ripple effect over time.
Orokpo also encourages us to see challenges as opportunities for growth. He talks about how those difficult moments can actually deepen our faith.
It's like when things are smooth sailing, we tend to coast. But when we hit those rough patches, we're forced to dig deep and rely on something beyond ourselves. That's when our faith is truly tested and refined.
So those challenges, while uncomfortable, can ultimately make us stronger.
Exactly. And if you're going through something difficult right now, don't lose heart. See it as a chance to lean into your faith and discover a newfound resilience and trust in God.
Before we wrap up, I want to share a final thought from Apostle Michael Orokpo that really resonated with me. He said, "The visible world was crystallized from the invisible world. If you think there's beauty in the world, search God's presence." What a powerful statement.
It really invites us to go beyond the surface level of things and seek that deeper connection with God.
To see the beauty around us as a reflection of the divine.
So as we go about our week, let's carry that thought with us. Let's look for the beauty in the everyday and allow it to remind us of the unseen presence that surrounds and sustains us. Thank you for joining us on Faith is the Podcast, and a special thanks again to Business Referred for sponsoring this episode. If you're a local business owner looking to expand your reach, head over to info@businessreferred.com and let them know we sent you. Until next time, may your faith be strengthened and your heart filled with peace.